Good evening and welcome to a local radio phone-in. Now, tonight we're interviewing Mark Windows, a conspiracy theorist who believes his neighbour's cat is the reincarnation of Elvis. A square earther who thinks that if you go further than Southend Pier, you will fall off the edge of the world. An alt-right extremist, anti-Semitic, racist that has been radicalised into voting Brexit and supporting Trump. Above all, he is a man-made climate change denier. Now, Mark, what are you doing to help your local community to offset the effects of man-made global warming?
What we have to look at here, Chris, is
I'm sorry, we have to stop you there. We've run out of time.
Yeah, that's quite simply how it's done. Yeah, good. Oh, it's you. It was you after all.
Actually, I forgot to put these up. Hang on a moment. We've got to be like local radio. We've got to be totally non-biased. So I forgot to put these up. You see, and of course very unbiased, of course. But that's just the way the BBC work. If anybody comes with any information, off they go.
Well, the thing is, we have to look at the origins of all this and where it came out, because what the BBC now are a kind of branch of British intelligence services, and people will go, what do you mean the British intelligence services? That sounds like some kind of deep state thing. Well, television is deep state. The thing is, in this country, what we have a kind of concealed corruption and concealed subversion. Whereas if you went to an openly communist country, you'd see that it was actually corrupt. So the corruption in this country is hidden. And how do you hide corruption? Well, in actual fact, to hide corruption, put it in the open. Because if you keep telling one lie all the time, the people will actually believe it. Let's go back to Nurse Naira. That's something most people might remember. Do you remember that when the Kuwaiti ambassador's daughter was actually employed by a PR company called Hill and Knowlton and taught how to lie in front of the camera and given a script? And she said, well, the soldiers threw the babies out of the incubators onto the cold floor. No, it was a complete lie. It was complete fabrication. But the point is that because it was repeated all over the world and everybody saw it many times a day, everyone who was infected by television saw that had an emotional resonance with them. So it didn't matter what you said afterwards. The damage had been done. The actual propaganda had been inflicted on those people. So if you're going to talk about climate change, all you have to do is show some pictures of polar bears. Doesn't matter. The pictures don't have to be related to the actual subject even. So you're talking about melting glaciers. Okay, well, when did they melt? What time was it? What time of year? They melt at certain times of year. Okay, so let's get a glacier that's melting in the summer and put it on as though they're doing that all year round. This is the thing. It's all about context. There's no context to anything, and nobody asks for context either. That's the important thing. So then you take it to the next stage. What about terror attacks? Where did those pictures come from? Who took them? What day were they taken on? Where are the date and time stamps? For instance, the 7/7 bombings. Well, on the trial run for the bombing, I don't know whether anyone remembers it, but with the 7/7 bombings in London, killed 52 people. On the trial run, you can see those boys clearly going into Luton Station. We did a thing called 7/7 Revisited. And what happened was we traced the footsteps of those boys who went and were accused of bombing the London Underground and the bus. Now, the thing is that when you actually took the story apart, it's totally implausible, and they could never have gone where they were meant to have gone in the time they were meant to have gone there. But the thing is that the public aren't given access to anything. And now, because of rolling news, anything can be stated, and this happens all the time. So you could slander a whole country, and you could stage a coup in a country with 5 actors and a camera. Does that answer your question, Chris? Oh, I'm still on air.
Well, it's very true, because they say that we see what was it now? More images in a day than somebody during the American Civil War saw in their lifetime. Quite amazing.
Yes, well, the thing is about that, we have to look at when rolling television came in. It came in the 80s in America. It started to really take off. I mean, America's had cable TV since the 50s, really, but over here, not so. And when that came in, and we have this plethora of channels, you go to every news channel. Why are they all the same? Well, they're all the same because they get their information from two sources. They get their information from two sources. They get their information from two sources.
From the sources, you know.
Yeah, well, it's Reuters and News International. Associated Foreign Press and Reuters. Used to be News International, which is the two now. So you got Associated Press, Associated Foreign Press, and Reuters. Where do they get it from? Well, this is the interesting thing, because what we have now is PR agencies and consultancies that are supplying them news. So we've got this huge crossover into unreality. So in other words, your news isn't actually coming from people who are embedded journalists. Now, what's an embedded journalist? An embedded journalist is someone in a hotel in a very safe part of a city. And they would go out and say, yes, I can hear the bombs going off in the background right now. And we believe this has happened. We believe that's happened. And you can see the trace of fire in the background. It looks like the Americans are bombing the terrorist site. Well, there's no evidence for any of this ever given. And then the person goes back to their minibar, spends the rest of their allowance and gets pissed with the film crew. You know, it's just nonsense. And so television creates unreality. So that's the main thing. People aren't used to sourcing their own news, and also they repeat everything. So hence you get 97% of scientists agree. Well, what do 97% of scientists agree upon? That is never asked, you see. So the main question is never asked. So in other words, what time was that taken? Okay, it says live, and we see some tracer fire going off in the background. What is actually going on? Has anyone really found out what this scenario is actually about? No, they haven't. This happened with CNN, who went in the Iraq war, and it was all meant to be, oh, this is on the ground, this is what's happening, I can hear the booms going off in the background and all this kind of stuff. That's all very well, but what's the story? Okay, so what you have is a backdrop which has been created, or a backdrop that's used to create a narrative, and that's not news.
Well, that's right. I mean, the only time that we did, I think, get news was during the Vietnam War, because the camera crew were right at the front, and it is strongly believed that it was because of television that brought the Vietnam War to an end. Now, that is open to, shall we say, question. But when I was very, very young, I remember seeing the cameraman right at the front, and you see the Vietnamese running along in front of the camera. And, you know, the bullets and that flying everywhere. And unfortunately, people saw their sons killed in Vietnam before they got the official notice from the American forces. And after that, they tightened right up. And I remember during the Falklands War, wow, I mean, you just didn't see anything. The camera people, the news people were kept right back, and it was all very organised. They made out they couldn't get footage through, which was a load of old bovine excrement, because they could, because they had satellite technology then. And now you notice that broadcasting of events is stage managed, very stage managed. And I think that there was an actor that once said all they have to do as news crews is just check a child's shoe, and they find a smoking mound somewhere, put the child's shoe on there and just focus in on that, and then it creates people's emotions. And he said that.
Well, that's exactly what you need, emotional triggers, and that happens all the time. And that's a very good point, because if you've got a site, you need a story. So in other words, there has to be a memorable image. So to get a memorable image, then you need to contrive something. There has to be something that's usually out of context, because if you've just got a place where there's been an explosion and you're not really allowed to film body parts, so basically they need a child's doll that's got its head blown off or something. You see what I mean? These things are just basic cinematic techniques, and as a filmmaker, these are the sort of things that build a story. So in other words, if you're trying to expose something to lead the viewer into something, you can have a tracking shot, and then you can have say some clothes strewn with blood, you can have a broken doll, You can then have a door that's been smashed in. You see, these things say, oh, something terrible happened here, but they're taken out of context. So in other words, the clothes might have been bloody from another day. The doll was broken by the child, and the door was already kicked in. The point is that you're making the viewer believe something with a series of connections, and that's how our documentary works. Like all this rubbish that David Attenborough spouts over, Second World, One Planet, and all this stuff. The photography, the cinematography is fantastic, and then you've got this stupid old git spouting rubbish about climate change over it, and it's got nothing to do with what's going on. And then, of course, he got caught out with the seals who were getting frightened off the cliff and rolling down the cliff. Well, that happens all the time. And as a naturalist, if he was a naturalist, he'd know that. But he let that go into that documentary. So he's got no editorial control. He's not a naturalist. He's a voiceover, and a really rubbish one at that. I mean, but the people think that he's a legend. And basically they think he's like, well, again, what happened with Jimmy Savile? National treasure. What happens to national treasures? Yeah, interesting, isn't it?
Very interesting. And I mean, this has gone on throughout the years. I mean, I don't want to harp on about my father, but my father was one of the first ones in on D-Day, and it was so bad that the reporter who was supposed to go in, the BBC reporter, didn't go in and stayed on board the ship. And then many years later, before my father died, he got a BBC recording, which I don't know if you can still buy it, of the reporter from the ship as if he's going in with the landing craft when he wasn't, and he's saying there are some barges here on the left. They weren't barges, they were landing craft, and he's getting everything wrong. Now historians will listen to that and get the whole thing wrong, but they wouldn't read a book that my father's written or what people, the ordinary person has written. Oh no, this chap was a respected BBC reporter and he's quite safe sitting back in the ship, making out he's on a landing craft when he wasn't. And he's calling, and he said, "Oh, everybody's in fine feather. Yes, they're just walking ashore now." They went underwater. They were actually being blasted to hell on the beach. But he's making it look as if, it's like a Sunday afternoon on Brighton Beach, And that is...
Well, you see, it's not in the public's interest for them to know that these things really happen. It's in the public's interest to know that their taxes go to fight enemies, and it's in the public's interest to know that we win wars, and it's in the public's interest to know that everything's going to be all right in the end. So they created a fairy story through the media. That's fine. That's what it's for. The problem is when people believe that.
Well, that's right. Now, Affected Area in our chat room has made a very important point, and I can back him up on this. He said British media and professional protesters going into climate propaganda overdrive today. I agree with you, Affected Area, because I have to confess this. Please don't tell anybody, but I accidentally tuned into BBC local radio. I know, I'm deeply ashamed, and it's to listen to the weather forecast. And I thought, hang on, and they're waffling on and on and on. What is your community? And all they kept saying, are you worried about climate change? You should be worried. And it's worry. So I thought, I won't say what.
Climate change is a fear-driven project. I mean, it's an apocalyptic fear-driven project. So if you've got an apocalypse, you can't let up on apocalypse. You've got to keep it going.
Well, that's right.
Because if it's not an apocalypse, then it's not going to happen, is it? So you've got to keep the threat level up to bikini black, whatever it is.
Well, that's right. But what got me, I tuned over to another local radio station. I think it must have been I'm a funny age or something. I don't know what it is, difficult age. And it was on 3 counties. It was on Essex. And I think it was actually on Kent radio as well. Couldn't believe it. It's everywhere. And they kept going on about David Attenborough.
Oh, what, you mean the national treasure?
That's right. The highly scientific man that reads the script.
I mean, isn't it? It's ironic, isn't it, that we put this information out, and I do tons and tons of research, and he's a national treasure, and we're conspiracy theorists. But if that doesn't tell you everything, then that's all you need to know. I mean, the thing is that the media promotes these idiots, and they're promoted because they are idiots. I mean, the BBC does checks and balances on people before they take them on. They ain't going to have anyone with a functioning brain cell in there now. They're all subversives. They're all into this kind of fake left agenda that's being pushed by the people who are actually puppeteering the government. And That's the whole point. You wouldn't get on the BBC that George Soros was funding the citizens' assemblies, would you, when he is? Well, you wouldn't get that, would you? Because it's not in the public's interest for them to know that. It's in the public's interest for them to think that they're making a choice. Well, of course, they're not. You know, and we're trying to tell them that they're not making a choice, and then we're negative, you see.
Well, Jeremy Vile, as you call it, was said many months ago. Sorry, that's your one, Jeremy Vile. That's a brilliant one. Was saying, I don't listen to him normally, but I was in the car and I switched it on. Not him. And he was saying how marvellous George Soros is and what he does, what he funds, how marvellous. And it was like a sort of free PR for George Soros. I mean, how did the BBC get away with it? I just don't know. It's just beyond me.
Well, for a start, you're talking about a very insulated environment. So it's any insulated environment becomes an echo chamber by nature. So, in other words, it's insulated. They're very dumbed down, the people who work in there, and they think they're not. That's the problem. So what you've got is you've got a huge layers of these sort of younger people who are working in there now, who have been mentored into the climate change propaganda school, and they're now making decisions. So you won't have anybody who's outside the hive mind there, and they don't look at news as intelligent people would. So what that means, I'm patronizing, it's true. We covered a story that Inside Russia Inside, I think it's called. It's on YouTube, and it was basically calling out Greta Thunberg and the process behind Greta Thunberg for what it was. They called it political paedophilia. Now, it wouldn't even occur to the BBC to put that out, one, because it's not politically correct, and two, it would be so shocking that it would be deemed hate speech, you see. Now, the thing is that if you actually say something and frame it in a logical way, then you won't be allowed to put it out. So that means that language has been subverted as well, because people haven't got the ability to get past the fear to actually express what is actually going on, and that's a huge part of it. So if you're looking at that side of it, it's quite amusing. But also, the thing is about television is that it's a medium that is conducive to telling a story. Words and pictures tell stories. I think we made that point at the beginning, or I did, but that's a really important thing. And as a filmmaker and someone who's done documentaries, I mean, what happens is once you put music under something, you can get very pictures that don't really say anything, but once you put music under something, it changes the whole mood. Now, that's great if you're making a film and you want to engage people in a story, but it's no good for news. And what you get is these rolling news items where you have a narration over pictures, and the two are not connected. And that is a disconnect in the brain, because people connect the words and the pictures as though they are the same thing, and they're not. Look at the pictures with the volume down. What do they tell you? And where did those pictures come from? It's all very interesting stuff, but the thing is that people who watch a lot of television go, oh, it doesn't affect me, you know. Well, I'm afraid it does, because when you actually start reading and looking at information and being able to sift through information, your brain changes. You're using a different part of your brain. Television is hypnotic. Its flicker rate alone will hypnotize people. I'm not susceptible to hypnotism, but people get addicted to the television. People who've got things like Alzheimer's will stare continuously at television because they're getting almost like a rush off it. It's not dopamine, but it's an addiction, and it's to do with the flicker rate of the television. Have you noticed when you're in a room and someone's got a television on, at certain points everyone will look towards the television? And it's a very interesting thing. Almost as soon as there's a gap in the conversation, people will just look at the television. And that is a huge problem, because it means that it's drawing your attention and your energy to it. And that is not a good thing. And what comes out of it is yes, it's basically you're overloading yourself with stuff that's 97% of the time of no importance whatsoever. It's got no importance. Nothing on there is important. It doesn't tell you anything. I've been at people's houses when there's a news item on. I've said, well, that was a waste of 5 minutes. And they go, what do you mean? I said, well, they didn't say anything. They didn't say anything. Nothing was conveyed. So, in other words, it's all about intelligence and how you put something across. If you write a news story, it goes something like this. There's two ways of writing news. I did a journalism course years ago. You go straight into the story. You go, 57 people have been killed in a bus crash. It's believed that it was a terrorist incident. Then you get a thing called a delayed drop. You go, 180 people have died in terror attacks in, say, Syria this year. The security forces have been monitoring this on every level, and the attacks have happened so far in blah, 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 blah. That's called a delayed drop. In other words, you do some exposition before you get into the story. You give some context to the story. But the news story, we had to write them, and basically they give you the information of what happened. Say a fire started at number 37, the neighbours from number 38 came out at 6:25. It was believed the children escaped through the back window. The children are safe now. The mother is still believed to be in there and presumed dead, but we haven't been able to get an update. We're waiting here outside the house. Now, that's what a news reporter would say, you see. Now, the point is there's a series of things there that could be factual, but rolling news and the stuff that you get on the BBC generally doesn't do that. It goes into lots of areas which have nothing to do with the event. They tell you things without any foundation evidence. Especially, this is the climate change thing. None of the climate change agenda has any foundation evidence. And I think that's a great example of it. You know, you don't need any evidence.
Well, that's right. I mean, going back to what you said about people's attention with television, I had a recent experience where the hole in the wall went wrong. I wanted some money. I went down to the market. I needed some cash. So I had to queue the old-fashioned way at the cashier part. And because there's only one or two cashiers in the bank now, there's a queue right around the corner. So I'm standing in the queue, and they've got this massive screen blasting out BBC News 24. And I noticed people were being, including myself, were being hypnotized by it. You can't help but look at it. And I was thinking, this is rubbish. Why am I staring at it? I tried to look away, and then suddenly I look back again. And I'm trying to kind of stop myself looking at it. And it was the usual thing with the reporter walking towards the camera, being very smug. And it was about some, excuse my language, crap hole in the East End where I suppose I couldn't hear it because I had the sound down. I think it was about drug addicts or something. But it's all this kind of, the way it's presented is very smug. And I've noticed the BBC is super smug and crisp. And it's like the other news stations, Channel 4. I mean, I haven't had a television for 10 years. And when you see it, after being away from it for 10 years, it's a bit of a cultural shock. You think, people watching this rubbish? I don't think you've got a telly. Have you, Mark?
No, not for about 18 years.
Well, spot on. As the best. And I've noticed that if you don't have a television, when you get away from that, you can reflect upon it, because it is you're kind of mesmerised by it. But what I'd like to get on to is, suppose we sit back and we accept what the BBC says and we do everything they say. What will our lives be like in the very near future?
Well, this is interesting, yeah, because I think we're talking about a society that's a bit like everyone's going to be a Stepford wife, male and female, because what we've got now is the public are becoming more and more unquestioning and losing critical thinking. I mean, critical thinking is a term that was a bit abused, really, because Marxists used it. People like Herbert Marcuse and the Frankfurt School, they called it critical thinking. Well, it wasn't really critical thinking, it was critical propaganda. But the actual ability to think critically and look at things and deduce things is something that only you would get in very elite parts of the education system now. You wouldn't get it lower down. So there's a huge problem here, because the state education system is now dumbing people down. It always did, because as Henry Ford said, he wanted a nation of workers, not a nation of thinkers. I think it was him that said that. But the thing is then that people were generally more intelligent. We are being dumbed down. I say I particularly would exclude myself from that, along with you, hopefully, and people who are listening. But the point is that the way we did it last week. I mean, that show called The Big Green Ego, it's absolutely shocking how people cannot think and repeat things without foundation evidence. Excuse me. It's better.
That's right. But I think that also people are duplicators. They will duplicate what the news has told them. I know somebody that's like that, and they will kind of regurgitate to what they've been told to think, or what they don't think, what they've been told to say. And when you say something to them which is out of their very narrow little box, they don't hear you. I've noticed that a lot.
Well, that's a good point, because that's what happened that's why I did that show, The Big Green Ego. So what happened was, it was all about this thread that started off about those Australian bushfires. And I thought, well, what I might do is actually bring some facts in here and see what happens. Next thing, something very predictable happened, but something totally absurd. And this one jumped in and said, don't listen to him. He obviously voted Brexit. Now, this is kind of something like, that could be almost like out of a Monty Python sketch. You say, the fires in Australia, well, loads of people have been caught starting them. Don't listen to him. He voted Brexit. It's just unreal to say something like that, isn't it? Because the point is, the real point about this, is that I'm not on the electoral register. So I couldn't vote anyway. But the point, and then it goes into, you're Boris Johnson's best mate, and you're this and you're that. Now, I put this stuff, then you're conspiracy theorists and all the rest of it, but the level of programming with these idiots is pretty scary, because you could probably give them a gun and they'd probably go out and shoot someone if they were told.
Well, when you think about it, how did these dictators, say Mao and Stalin, how did they kill so many people? Because they wouldn't have done it on their own, because if they were alive, they'd still be doing it now. They had to get willing people to do it who don't really think. They're sort of, go over and shoot those people. We don't do that for the party. Bang. And
there has to be an ideological breakdown within the person. I mean, they have to go through a series of traumas to get them to that state. So it's the climate change thing. That's why they're inducing trauma through this child shouting at them, and they're being told it every 5 minutes. Because if they let up on this, it's like I said at the beginning, it's an apocalyptic idea. So because it's an apocalyptic idea, it has to be relentless. Because if people think, the apocalypse isn't till a couple of years off, then that's no good. It has to be now. That's why they go, act now, tell the truth. And this thing, tell the truth, is very interesting, because I noticed that thing you sent me about climate change. It was Client Earth, who were basically an offshoot of things like Earth First, and there are a bunch of lawyers who go around suing oil companies and all that. And she said the word truth in about 20 different ways, 20 different times. We need to get to, what truth are you talking about? Tell the truth about what? It was never clearly defined what they had to tell the truth about. And it said, so they say, well, they're lying about this. No, it just says tell the truth. It doesn't say they're lying about anything, you see. So if you're going to try to find, if something's not true, then it's got to be a lie usually, right? So if you're taking it to these sort of levels. So if it's not true, then it must be a lie. So in other words, they don't say that you're lying. They say tell the truth, which is an ambiguous statement. It doesn't mean, well, you should tell the truth, shouldn't you? You see what I mean? What they're doing is they're just imposing sound bites. And it's like these charities do, where you see the little African child who's got flies on them. And it's totally out of context. And they go, for just £3 a month. £3 a month what? We can pay your wages. What's the child got to do with it? You see what I mean? This is the whole point, that the way that the public are engaged. It's very, very simple. I mean, because I've read all about propaganda, and you can do it. It's so easy to do this stuff. It's childishly simple to manipulate images and words. It's childishly simple to do it. All you need is an editing program and whatever you're going to manipulate, and then you get someone like Actabor, and Mayday, 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 climate and economic emergency. And it's like, it's just anybody can do that, right? Any actor can put on a false voice and act falsely to the camera. It's kind of absurd, the whole thing, and it's something that you can study all the time. But how much do you need to study it? You don't need to study it really. You need to take a detached view of what you're seeing and say, well, what am I actually being told here? Which bits of it are true? And you can never actually get to that point, because I don't know anyone who's got a television, but when I go round to someone's house who's got one, and I see the things that they watch, I question them on it sometimes. I say, why are you watching Bargain Hunt? Oh, I learn a lot from this. Now, I watched it for 40 minutes and I actually lost brain cells. I'm sure I lost a couple of brain cells while I was watching it, because how can you learn anything from something like that? Because the premise of it is you get these completely dozy people who put on these daft jackets and they go to an overpriced junk shop in a middle class area. They get ripped off and then they try and make money out of the thing that's not worth the money in an auction. I mean, what? That's not even a premise, right? That's not even a premise for a show. I mean, if I went to a TV company with that, they go, "No, that won't work." But it does every day, right?
But notice when these programs they're slotting in. Now, I'm completely soap opera ignorant. I'm quite proud of my ignorance, actually. You have to really work hard to be as ignorant as I am of soap operas. But I can almost guarantee, even though I've got no evidence, and maybe our viewers might be able to show some evidence, that they're slotting in climate crisis into the story.
Of course. Well, it'll be part of the remit within the script writers. So if you're in like a weekly EastEnders meeting, say, okay, Chris, we really need, but the climate crisis is the meme of the moment. So everyone in the Queen Vic's going to be talking about it, aren't they? So you have to inject it into sort of, get out of my pub, you climate denier. You'll never be a Mitchell. And then,
Yes, for crisis. But when you look at Edward Bernays, I mean, he's probably looking up from hell now, thinking, "Oh my work, I've really done well, haven't I?"
Well, the thing is with him, these are people who are looking at social engineering. You see, I mean, the thing is that a lot of these people have a custodial view of society. In other words, well, it's for their own good. And that's a particular thing that these social Darwinists come out with. And we've covered that a lot in the shows because it's a different mentality. So in other words, you've got the sort of ignorant middle classes, the Guardian readers, and the people who think that, cycling everywhere is great, but they've got a 4x4 in the garage whenever they need it. I mean, these people are too privileged to know what is happening. That's the problem, that they can't see through it because they don't want to. And it's fashion. Their lives are, in my view, trivial. They don't confront big issues. They try and shy away from them. And that's what the custodial society is about. It's about keeping people insulated from a lot of traumatic things. So that's what television's for, is to insulate you from the trauma of life. But also, conversely, it's there to traumatize you into how you're meant to act for the common good. So in other words, if they want you to go to war, then you've got to hate the enemy. It's just dead simple. There's nothing complicated about what they're doing. It's basic subversion, basic propaganda. It's very, very simple. And it all comes down to hypnosis and how easily people are hypnotized into a belief, because that is the main thing. And I think it's susceptibility to hypnotism is a big part of this, because I've never been susceptible to hypnotism. And that's not because there's anything special about that. It's just that I'm not susceptible to it because I have this awareness about everything I'm seeing. It's not that I'm totally judgmental about everything I'm seeing. It's because when you develop an awareness, you start looking at things very dispassionately and in a detached way. And so you don't become engaged that easily. The thing with television is it relies on engagement. And if you don't engage with it, then it becomes an irritant. So when I watch it, I become irritated because I'm not engaging with it. I'm actually looking at it critically from a detached point of view. I'm looking at it, say, like from someone from another planet who'd come down and go, why are they buying something that's not worth the money, then trying to sell it for more money than it's not worth? Do you see what I mean? Where someone would watch it and go,
exactly the same. I mean, it's like Monty Mould brought up a thing about lemmings are cliff divers. Now, I grew up believing that lemmings committed suicide, and it was a mystery why they did it. It's only in the last couple of years Walt Disney has admitted that lemmings were so boring that they got cameramen to throw over the edge of a cliff and make out that they committed mass suicide to make them interesting, because they're just little rodents that run around and excuse my language.
yes.
So how do you make them interesting? And,
we did a David Attenborough sketch about that, and
oh, you remember?
yeah, that's right. We said, like lemmings, they run from the cliff to their own destruction. And she comes in and goes, David! Lemmings don't run off the cliff, David!
The walrus jumped off a cliff or something or other. But,
yeah.
But David Attenborough, as you call him, he always looks like an office worker that shouldn't really be there. I mean, I saw him amongst gorillas, you know, and he looked like as if all the main reporters out the way. Can we get the bloke who's the office junior in to do this? Because he looks sort of like a square peg.
He looks out of place, you know. I mean, whenever you see him, he looks kind of out of place, and he's not somebody who's very comfortable in the wild. Yeah, you're right. He's an urbanite. He's not someone who looks comfortable anywhere. In fact, you know, he doesn't, because he's an actor. He's not used to his. He looks uncomfortable in his surroundings. Yeah, like when that gorilla was in the background. I think that gorilla was drugged. I don't think they would have let the gorilla had just had a baby, hadn't it? I think as well. Was that the one?
I think you're spot on there. Mind you, the first person to actually sit with a gorilla was Johnny Morris. That was long before Attenborough did it, and that gorilla had just had a baby. So probably they were working out their tranquilizers from there on. But I think you're right. When any animal has a child, it's very protective of that child or offspring or whatever you want to call it, and they would not allow even fellow gorillas near that baby. So allowing David Attenborough,
I think you'd find that the gorilla was drugged and they'd had to take out a huge amount of insurance for Attenborough. You see, that's the thing, that if you're the talent in a production, then all of this has to be laid out first. That's why it's so difficult to do location shooting, because everyone has to be covered. There has to be so much health and safety. You know, you can't just go and do things. I mean, it's interesting, actually. As a little aside, I don't know whether anyone's seen this, but John Noakes of Blue Peter climbed up Nelson's Common in a pair of flares in the 70s on a ladder with no harness. And he's right at the top one. That was actually quite incredible watching that, because you'd never get anything like that now. And imagine getting your foot stuck in your flares at the I mean, which people often did, didn't they? Your foot stuck in your flares, you can't move your foot, can you? You know.
Especially the turn-up flares, they were the most dangerous.
Yeah.
But I've seen that several times. I can't stand heights, and I mean, you know, I was cringing. I mean, apparently they did it twice, because the first time the film didn't go right, so they had to do it a second time.
Yeah, but I mean, that's quite, you know, you can't imagine Attenborough being able to do anything like that, can you? You know.
No.
I was quite surprised when I saw it, actually, because I didn't really remember that at the time. But that was kind of extreme. I mean, you know, they would never let anything like that happen now.
Well, that's right. That's partly the reason why Christopher Trace, I believe, he had to go into the sea in January off the English coast, and it was snowing. And there he is in his bathing trunks running into the sea. And he said, at that point, I'd had enough. He said, I couldn't handle it anymore. And I'm not sure whether he resigned, but he's dead now. But he was one of the first presenters on there with a fashion model, although I'm not old enough to remember when it was first on. But yeah, you're quite right with John Noakes. I mean, some of the things they did in those days without insurance was...
It'd be great to get Attenborough to do a Steve Irwin, wouldn't it? And the crocodile is looking at me, and in a minute, he's going to snap. And then he puts the bag on its head. You can't imagine him doing anything like that, can you? Such a poser. He'd never do that. Do you remember that, Steve, when he used to put the bag on the crocodile's head and it just go asleep? And then he's snapping at his ankles, you know, with jaws, you know. Because those things are so dangerous. But because they act kind of reflex, then he kind of, you know, he knew what they were going to do, because they're predictable. But that was incredibly dangerous with those things, because they are very, very strong and very quick, those things. They can just kill you with a tail. They could just whip you with a tail and you break your legs. Oh yeah. Well, he used to Steve Irwin used to sit in front of deadly snakes. Was it the black mamba, which I think is probably... That's right. He goes, look at the beautiful eyes. Look at the beautiful eyes.
One of those. I don't like snakes, but no, it's nothing personal. I just don't like snakes. Full stop.
Well, don't go into the BBC staff canteen then. Very simple.
But no, it's. I think you mustn't go into the BBC and ask for. No, I won't say. But no, what was it? Famous Victorian delight, which is faggots. So, have you any faggots, please? Cause
Oh, you'll be thrown out straight away now. That's hate speak.
Oh no, I'm talking. It's actually on the BBC cookery channel, so you can actually go on there and learn how to cook them with onions. You see, we're talking about cooking. So not the American slang.
I want an LGBT BLT.
But really, where can you run? I mean, I always remember Yuri Bezmenov. Please see him on YouTube before they boot it off. It's a must for everybody to see Yuri Bezmenov, I think. He did a series of speeches in 1983. He was attached to this KGB, and he actually defected from the former Soviet Union in 1970, and he came to the West. And the things that he said about the people in the West who were working for the KGB, he knew they were, who were supposed to be in the Pentagon. And what he did say, though, is he said, once America or the West is destroyed, there'll be nowhere to run to. The only place you could go to will be the Antarctic with penguins. That's all you'll be able to go to. Now, the thing is, where can we run to? Because it seems the entire world is now infected by this kind of global New World Order Agenda 2030, which is...
I think it's much worse in the West. It's much worse in the West. I mean, you can go to other countries and people aren't subverted. Their governments might be totalitarian in many respects, but the people aren't as subverted. I mean, I don't think you get these middle-class Marxists in lots of other countries. You get it amongst younger people, but it's not as prevalent here. Britain is the centre of it all. It came out of Britain. So Britain's going to be the most brainwashed country on the planet because brainwashing really came out of here. You know, we were very ahead with all that, and along with the Soviets. So the Soviets had a different kind of way of doing it, but we've taken on this kind of role now where the media does it. Because we're a media-centric country, then people believe it. They believe Actabor and all this rubbish. But the point is, if you go to another country and they've got state TV, they don't believe state TV because they know it's propaganda. Here, they don't know it's propaganda, so that's dangerous. So if you're in a totalitarian country and everyone knows it's a totalitarian country, that's better. But we're in a totalitarian country and people believe it's not. That's much worse. So if you go to countries, you know, like India, I've been in Nepal, and the Gurkhas basically run certain parts, and people say, you know, they're fine, but basically they're the army. And they say that, well, you can mess with anyone in this country, just don't mess with the army, right? Now, wherever you go there, you often see the army, but they're not there as a sort of force against the people. But what you've got there is, you know, you've got a different kind of thing, but the people within themselves have more freedom. For instance, a lot of these tribal events and festivals, Hindu, like they have the Shivaratri and they have the Mask Festival and all these different they have festivals there all the time, and the government cannot interfere in those because these are tradition. I mean, for good and bad, you know. I mean, I saw things getting quite out of control. They're quite exciting, really, because there's all these events on all the time. But the government don't really interfere in that because they can't interfere too much. And they've got a Maoist government over there, you see. They're Maoist. So they are a communist country. The Communist Party joined up with another party over there, and they became sort of, well, it's de facto communist, really. So that's quite interesting. And when you go to these places that are meant to be totalitarian, they're less totalitarian than here, in fact, because over there, if you see, you've got officials and people who stop you and all the rest of it, but it's not on the level it is here, because I think that it's to do with the mollycoddling of society. People here have a different view of authority. They think authority is good, a lot of these people. That's the thing, that their appeal to authority is like, well, I suppose you think Elvis lives on the moon if you don't think that 97% of scientists agree. And we've done so many shows on this stuff because it's like a form of comedy, really. But the indoctrination level here is very high. And also, what I found is that, you know, you get out of the UK and people, I think people are less subverted. So I think that the Asian countries are probably less subverted than here. You know, it depends where you want to go. There are parts of the world where you see Agenda 21. You do see it. You know, you see it all over the world. You see UN Habitat. The UN are like a virus that's everywhere. But you don't see the level of subversion within people. People are generally happier. You know, the thing is with Britain, it's being brought down. Britain is being brought down by design, and the people are going along with it. And that's an interesting thing. They're allowing citizens' assemblies to basically dictate to them what they're going to do. And the people are turning around thinking, isn't it great we've got a citizens' assembly? Now, this is absolutely absurd. And it's something that I couldn't believe how quickly this has spread. And nobody looks into it. They get asked all the same questions. They're getting steered by lobbyists into a predetermined outcome. And then you've got like a climate scientist, say the one in Oxford, like Miles Allen. Miles Allen was rebuked for lying in a court of law in 2018 in a climate trial in San Francisco. The climate trial wasn't publicized because, guess what? The oil companies didn't lose because they didn't have any evidence against them. It had a slide from an IPCC slideshow. And Miles Allen, when asked by the judge, Mr. Allen, how much CO2, man-made CO2 is there? And he goes, 0.04 of 0.04%, sir. He goes, but you've made it look like there's 10,000% here, Mr. Allen. He goes, well, yes, I have actually, you know. And then he brought in a graph which showed more warming than there was. Judge rebuked him for that. Now, this is serious, right? If you go into a court and you're trying to mislead that court, or you mislead the court, that judge will jump on you, which that one did. But the point is that why aren't the public thinking like this? Why are they just believing it all? Because television has a very powerful effect. Everyone's got one of those massive widescreen TVs on their wall. Where I live, I go past the windows and they're all glued to something that's about the size of the wall.
Same here.
You know, yeah. And that is totally and utterly taking over your awareness. You know.
This particular person who tells me who's very well informed, reads one of the, shall we say, rag newspapers, and has a screen absolutely taken over the wall of his house, tells me exactly what's going on because he's so well informed, and sort of talks to you talks to me as if I'm an idiot or some weird conspiracy theorist. Oh yes, you're into conspiracies, aren't you? Oh yeah, you're a tin hat wearer and all that sort of stuff. I said, well,
I had this in Waltham Forest, yeah. I was at the People's Voice TV, and my neighbours were asking me. They were kind of young, these people, and they said, "Oh, what are you doing?" I said, "I'm working at this place in Wembley called the People's Voice. It's a TV station." I said, "It was started by David Icke," and he said, "David Icke." You know, and I can understand why they said that. But then what I did was I told them about Agenda 21 and what was going to happen in the neighbourhood. And we were going to get thousands of new flats and all the roads were going to close. And it was like, you know, then guess what? Thousands of new flats will build, all the roads are closed. And now those people are probably in shock because they didn't have any input into what went on locally. And every time I went back there, it got worse and worse and worse. And the gulags are being built. Now, the thing is that when you look at how fast this has gone, then I think people are actually starting to panic a bit, which is an interesting thing because I've started seeing threads where they're going, oh, it's getting a bit frightening. Now, maybe they're people like us, right, but who are thinking about it. But if you're driving through these areas like Tottenham Hale, I was really shocked when I went round the gyratory system there at Tottenham Hale, which is an area of northeast London, which was really just sort of marshland, and then you've got a place called Edmonton next to it. But what they're doing now, they're building the density of the flats is horrendous. I've never seen anything like it. They are so big, these blocks as well. They're for thousands of people. You know, where are these people coming from? Well, they're planning to depopulate the countryside. And then they're going to bring in even more immigrants because all of the idea is to destroy the identity of the country. That's what they've got to do, and they're doing it. So then
that's right. all they need is a fake foot and mouth epidemic, and that can depopulate it overnight.
Hmm.
Sorry, I didn't.
Well, that's right. That's exactly right. Yeah, I mean, those things are so easy to do, and again, that's television. The public will be told something on television, and they'll do it. You know, I mean, it is incredible, and it's so easy to create shortages as well, and all that sort of stuff. I remember when there was a shortage of petrol, you know, for a couple of days, and you're driving around the North Circular using loads of petrol, and there's people go, they've still got some diesel down there. It's just like this, you know, they'll get some probably tomorrow morning. But the thing is that if you need it, you have to go and get it and all that. But yeah, it's incredibly simple to stage things, and the public are not questioning it, which is why we're doing these talks and why we do what we do. But I'm getting to the point with it and thinking, well, there doesn't seem to be that much kind of awakening to this, you know, not to the extent I thought there would be, because what's been going on for the past 5 years is absolutely horrendous. It's just unbelievable what's happened. The way they've sold off all the council housing. They use these subversive tactics all over the place. They did the thing where they moved everyone out of Bow in these blocks. This is the council tactic for the so-called Agenda 2030 plans, which is a UN thing, which is what this is all about. And they moved these people out all over the country. They lost all their tenancies, and they moved in people who were like artists. I did a gig at this place, a little community centre in Bow, and I said, "Where are all the locals? There's all these hipsters in here, you know." And it was like a little community centre, and they said, "Oh, they've all been moved out." And there was the young people. I spoke to a couple of them, and they say, "Yeah, it's called Artists for Action or something." Moved in. So what they did this fake thing to make the area look like it was kind of trendy. They bring in these young people, and they just boot everyone else out and bring them in. And I've known about this for years. It's been going on for at least 5 or 6 years. I mean, I moved out of Waltham Forest in 2015, and that is, you know, that's a testament to Agenda 21. But the point is, it's not there. It's happening everywhere. So there's not much dot joining has to be done, because all you have to do is look at different areas. 45,000 houses being built in a place called Marks Tay in Essex, between Colchester and Chelmsford, right? 45,000. And people are going, well, why do we need that many houses? But this is not just a one thing. This is everywhere. They're building new towns all over the country to link onto rail links. You know, it's quite incredible what's going on. And yeah, I mean, I noticed it in other places, you know. I mean, you can see Agenda 21 taking off in other countries, but it's not to the extent it is here. I mean, the whole of Britain is going to be closed off. This is the way it's going. And that's what I can't understand about maybe there is a big kind of resistance to this and we just haven't seen it. But I'm not really seeing it. Are you, Chris?
No, I'm not seeing it at all. And I think the only time people will do something is when the supermarket shelves are empty. Then they'll do something, and then it'll be too late. But I mean, you were talking about the shortages earlier. Now, I worked on a contract at, we call it Stanford No Hope, at Stanford Lee Hope in Essex.
I know it well. Yeah.
Major oil terminal. And I was, that was actually doing like a bomb shelter there. So if one of the oil storage tanks goes up, the people will be able to shut down different valves and this, that, and the other, whilst the fire crew try and get to them. So I wouldn't like to be in the control centre. But anyway, that's another story. But what I was going to say is, whilst I was doing survey and looking around and doing the drawings and that, I got speaking to some old sweats that were there. Who, you know, was an old boy that he was sweeping up, and I think he'd retired and he was just doing this for a bit of pen money. And he was there during the 1973 oil crisis, and he said, "Do you know, son?" He said, "when the old oil crisis was on, because what happens, people don't realise, is that oil is shipped from the Middle East, and because Tilbury is I think it's shallow water, they have to take the big oil tankers into, I think it's Rotterdam in Holland, and then small oil tankers come across the channel into Tilbury. And what was happening is the 1973 oil crisis, there wasn't a crisis, and all the oil tankers were told to drop anchor and not go into Tilbury. And he said it was causing a huge clog up in the channel of all these little tiny oil tankers because to create a shortage.
Yeah.
Now, You know, and I heard that from several. There's another old boy that told me that as well. Unless they all got together in the pub and said, "It's a good story," but that's what they told me. So
well, you have to question everything because they usually manufacturing stories is actually the norm with the way TV goes, and it starts at every level. You see, yeah, Stephen Truthseeker, you're absolutely right. That's exactly what happened at TPV. Yeah. That's an interesting one. We won't go into that, but that's an object lesson. That's why I just do my own thing now, because we can't really be infiltrated if it's just me, you know. And it's incredible. And the way everything is taken over. I mean, this is the problem with the media, you see. I mean, I'd like to get onto a bigger platform, but there's no way that I'd be able to do what I wanted to do on another platform. So you're stuck with this kind of idea that you want to put the stuff out, and you end up kind of funding it yourself, really. And that was, you know, when that People's Voice started, it's very optimistic, and I was incredibly enthusiastic. But the level of content wasn't as good as it should have been because they were trying to do too much. So I think that, and it's like tonight I was saying to you, Chris, I said, I'm not sure about this, Chris, so we're going to talk about, you know, we've got some, but the thing is, because I'm pretty hot on the sort of stuff I do, and those Sunday shows are incredibly dense in information. That's not always a good thing. And this chat format, I think, is absolutely brilliant. You know, I'm really enjoying this now, but I like to have kind of some good facts and things that to put over, you know, and that's the thing. I'm very kind of critical on what's put out. So I'm very careful about what's put out, in the respect that I don't want to put out things that are going to be of no use. You know, I mean, it was interesting that the other day, if you listen to a show called what is it, Big Green Ego, the Big Green Ego, all about fake green. In other words, not environmental. They're gullible. Well, that all came about because someone made these comments, and basically what they're using is reversal. They're blaming you for what they're doing, and then they accuse you of being part of some deep state conspiracy, which is so absurd, it's laughable. But then you take it apart and it's funny. But this is the thing, that is there an audience for this level of information? There isn't a big audience for it, I know that. There is an audience for it, and that audience is quite big. But what you're doing really is hooking up with other people who can think. That's what you're doing. And what tends to happen in this sort of situation is that people come in, and then there's distrust about one person. And this is the way it works. It's a very interesting thing, this, because when I was working at that People's Voice, someone set up a website that was slandering me, and I couldn't understand why I was being such a target there, because they weren't picking on anybody else. It was just me. I just thought it was very strange. And people came into TPV trying to disrupt, and we knew who they were because we'd already exposed what they were doing. And some of them I know were linked to the police and all the rest of it. So I knew what was going on, and I warned David Icke about it. I warned him. I said, these people come in, David, and they're trouble. And they did. And they wouldn't leave him alone. And this is the problem you've got. And then you get these infiltration. And it's like things. I had somebody put into my team, you know, as a medical researcher, who was just a nutcase, who was just there to disrupt me. And so you've got all this stuff going on. And this happens in organizations all the time, you know. And I've had it at a lot over the years, not so much now actually, because I put this out and it's kind of got its own momentum to it. But what I found was that the level of undermining and infiltration is very high in this country. People don't realise that the state interferes in pretty much everything. And what they've done now is they've made most of the public agents of the state. So the public are the citizen spies. That was the whole point of the big society. That's what communitarianism was about. The communitarianism that came out of David Cameron was that you would get people. It's the appearance of community. That's what communitarianism is. It's the appearance of engagement with community. But how do you do that? With a totalitarian system, you put people in who are going to be community leaders, and they're going to lead everyone into the inevitable outcome. But it looks as though they're members of the public. And I saw exactly how this has happened. There's no difference to any totalitarian system to what's going on in this country. There's no difference at all. That's exactly what the big society was all about. And I see it in organisations. I can see it a mile off now, which is why people send me stuff about these protests. And I say, no, they're a wrong un, they're a wrong un. Oh, they're from Occupy. That's that undercover copper from Occupy. And people send me the pictures, and I know exactly who they are. And it doesn't take many of them. This is a really interesting thing, right? And this is the power of the media as well, because when you see people from protests on media, I'm not going to say they're all fake, but pretty much all the ones I've seen who represent the group are fake. It's like when you get the community leader on the news, and we're going over live to Tottenham now in the wake of the worst riots for 20 years. Okay, so we've got a community leader here, and he's going to tell us what happened. Well, it appears there's been friction between the youth and the police for a long time. We've seen an eruption today like we've never seen before. The community is broken. I'm here to tell you that we're going to mend the community. We're going to give community services to the young people. I'm going to be in there working with the young people, and we're going to fight this. And then they go back to the studio. Okay, so lessons have been learned. That's called a public interest. It's bullshit, but it's in the public interest. I interviewed a fella. I won't give you his name. He was quite a nice bloke actually, but he was there to do that. He was a very quite a striking looking man who looked to those who'd be on Star Trek, and he was called Nims, right? And he was a very regal looking African man, and he'd come down there to talk about the Mark Duggan event, where Mark Duggan, he was a bit of he had a bit of a criminal kind of past, but what they did to Mark Duggan was they stitched him up with a gun that was found 10 feet from his body without his fingerprints on, and shot him. Okay, now that was started off this riot inadvertently. There was another event which started the riot where the police had battened some girl, and they'd been outside the police station, and the police had reacted pretty badly to something. Okay, now the thing is that this fella was telling me all this soundbite stuff, and I called him out on a few things, and he just smiled, but he couldn't say anything, but he knew what I was talking about. See, I said several times, I can't remember, it doesn't come to mind now what I talked to him about, but it was about this, and this Mark Duggan's she was a relative of him actually, and we interviewed her, and she actually started hugging me because none of the press would talk to them. See, so the thing is that what you've got here is you see, it's called a public interest. You can't report the truth because it's going to destabilize society. And that's what the public don't understand. They don't understand that what they're seeing is perceived to be for their own good. It's not true, but it's perceived to be for their own good. And everything you see on the TV is news is infiltrated. They use actors a lot. They use actors even for stories in local papers, right? They'll get somebody down who's going to be photogenic to be at an event. And people were telling me about this years ago. This is a common thing. And so the thing is that people have to look at what media actually is. Media is presenting something to you. Why is it presenting something to you? Because they want it to be something that will make you act accordingly. Now, what's accordingly means in the public interest. It's not in the public's interest for them to know that there's a dangerous epidemic of violence going on. But this is a converse thing. If you want them to think that, keep telling them that. Because this knife crime epidemic is really interesting, actually. Because I don't think there is a knife crime epidemic. I think there's copycat events going on. Because what happened is the kids who are doing it are into this postcode wars stuff. Now, that's been going on for years. And I know for a fact that in North London, there was stabbings every day. They were never on the news. I would go past our place where we had the studio up in North London, and there'd be blood on the pavement. You could walk past. I mean, there's blood on the pavement. There's parks closed off with tape there all the time. There are murders there all the time. But it's not in the public's interest for them to know that, because it's going to destabilize society. Now, there's certain, there's people on crack there walking around with weapons. It's not in the public's interest for them to know that, because that means that everything's out of control. And control is the important thing. So how do you control them? You control their minds through the media. But this knife crime thing is interesting, and it's being introduced to create fear, in my view. It's to create fear, because there's always been loads of stabbings in London. So what they're doing is they're creating more stabbings, creating more fear. So it becomes an industry. It's a crime industry. It's crime farming. Basically, they're farming the crime, which I think it's a social engineering exercise. So if you want more stabbings, just say there's been another stabbing, there's one here, there's one there. Then get the copycats, because a lot of this is over drugs, and a lot of these people are on drugs. These are just the facts, right? If you take people on methamphetamine, they will do very dangerous things. These are just facts. So none of this is ever actually addressed because it's not in the public interest, and that's all, you know. So I've been rapping a bit there, Chris.
No, it's very interesting, because it's very interesting about what you're saying about crime, because some years ago, it must have been about 10, 12 years ago, I was finding out that I found out through several sources. Well, I'll give you an example. There was a couple that lived in a village in Devon for years, and people left their cars unlocked. They knew the village bobby, and crime was somewhere else. You didn't really get much crime. And suddenly the village bobby disappeared, and a chap was just going into this person I was talking to was just going into his house, and his wife looked round and said, "Look, there's two legs out the side of your car." They looked round, and there's some kid trying to nick the radio out of the car. Anyway, this chap was a rugby player, and he tackled him, sat on it, and his wife called the police. And this kid, who was, let's say kid, probably youth, had a northern accent. And the copper that came along was near on retirement and said, "Don't you know what's happening?" Blair wanted to give the figures of crime to be reduced. So what they did, they moved all the tow rags out of the inner city and distributed them into little pretty villages around the country. And that's why some years ago, do you remember that case in Norfolk where that chap shot someone who had gone onto his property and spent time in jail? Do you remember that?
Was that not? Do you mean Tony Martin, the farmer?
That's the one, Tony Martin. Well,
yeah, but the Tony Martin case, Chris, was that the reason that he was done for that is because he didn't shoot him when he was coming in. He shot him in the back when he was leaving.
Yeah.
But that was the problem with that case, I think. Yeah.
But the thing is that the crime increased in the countryside, and when you look at it take a step back, so you've got this crime rates going up in the countryside, and the politicians can say, like Blair could say, well, you know, tough on crime, tough on reasons for crime.
Positive crime. Yeah.
It's positively working. Look at it. The crime rate in Newcastle's really gone down since our measures have been put in. They don't tell you that they've gone up in the countryside. And now Devon and Cornwall are very high crime rates there. People don't realise how high the crime rate is in those countries. Sorry, in those counties.
Yeah, it's very high.
It's all.
I've just seen his comment, Chris. I've just seen his comment. KT, your chat is just not relevant to the talk. It makes me wonder about the quality of the commentators. Well, I think the quality of the commentators is great, but the great thing about the chat box is it's never really relevant to what we're saying. They're having their own conversations, and it's brilliant. You know, I think that's great. That's what I love about we don't get many doing the Winners on the World chat box. It's almost like an exclusive little club, that one. There's not many people. Yeah. But I think it's very funny because I read them afterwards, and there's those bizarre conversations on there. They're hilarious, you know.
I like it when the trolls get in, because you see, this is for another program which I'm actually planning. You might want to be on this one, because I look on trolls in much the same way as a scientist looks at a lab rat. I find them interesting because I think they go into different categories. For example, I've noticed on Facebook, I'm getting a lot of people from, inverted commas, Palestine that want to be my friend. I don't think so. I think they're from...
Well, I know for a fact, Chris,
and in other words, they want to find out what's on my mind so they can send a load of garbage, which I'm getting through on Facebook, about a country we're not allowed to criticise. And I keep getting loads and loads of garbage. But I think that what you're talking about, infiltrators and things like that, I think we could do a whole program on that. And I'm actually...
Well, it's something I know a lot about, Chris, because I've studied it a long time. And someone phoned me up today, actually, and he said, I'm getting drawn into this thing you did about the big green ego. And the reason I didn't name the big green ego, because the big green ego is a generic term, and it's not... But he thinks it's all about him, you see, this bloke, one of the people who was into this slander thing, yeah? Making things up about our show. So basically, he's so egotistical, he can't he can't understand why I haven't named him, because in his mind he is the big green ego, because he's got a big ego, right? But the point is, it's a generic term that includes a lot of people, so he wants to take authorship of it, you see. But the point is that the tactics these people use, I can spot them a mile off. What they often do is accuse you of what they're doing to you. And it's just a simple reversal. And then what they do is they accuse you of not answering their questions, but they never answer what you've said. I mean, the biggest thing is, where is the document, the peer-reviewed document that states that CO2 drives temperature? Now, they give you these experiments, but that's not weather, right? They give you these controlled experiments and try and prove it like that. Well, that doesn't prove it. And it's also not true. So this is a really interesting thing. But yeah, I mean, the thing is with this sort of troll thing is we did a thing about 7-7 Brigade, and the thing is that the MOD train these people to go on Facebook and Twitter to wage a sort of storm against people, but it comes out of the psychological operations unit. And it was very funny because the 7-7 Brigade was set up in Reading in Berkshire, and they're actually looking for civilians to do it. And they have even army uniforms with these little chindits on, which was General Ord Wingate. And when there was an interview in an army magazine, and the fellow said to him, "So is this a psychological operation against the public?" And the sergeant major goes, "Well, no, yes." Now, that's a typical MOD answer, right? They'll go no and yes. But in this case, it kind of exposed that it was, you know. And I think that's really, really funny, because the MOD will always get it wrong. The bad news is that you see, the British intelligence is not intelligent, it's thick. But the bad news is that they kill people in people's lives, you know. I shouldn't be laughing at it, but that's the bad thing, is that what they'll do with people in other countries, they'll get the special services to go murder people, basically. Now, that's not a war. That's, you see, the thing is, there's always this kind of thing about the heroes of you know, British intelligence, but in actual fact, if someone's having a drink somewhere and they're off guard and you shoot them, well, that's not very difficult, is it? You know, it's like, what's special about that? You know, why would you get a medal for murdering somebody in cold blood with a gun? Do you know what I mean? It's like, it's cowardly, really, isn't it? So this is the whole point about it, is that there's this kind of big thing built up about British military intelligence, you know. And the thing is that I know, and the tactics they use, you can spot them a bloody mile off, because they attack you and go, I suppose you think all this stuff about your far right, that came out of MI5. Because it was Mark Rowley who said that before. Well, the new threat is from the rising far right. Well, there was no rising far right, and it's never risen. You've got a couple of these stupid organisations from the past, like the EDL, which was just basically a load of people from Kent and Essex on the whole, who didn't like foreigners, who had St George's flags in their driveway. You know what I mean? This wasn't a terrorist kind of organisation, right? It's kind of, the whole thing is totally absurd. And my favourite one was the Britain First one, which got onto the Metro. We talk about the media here, right? That's really interesting. It's got these two blokes with Britain First t-shirts on, yeah, with binoculars looking out over the White Cliffs of Dover. And it said, this extremist group, yeah. And the funny thing is, they said, well, so what are you going to do when you find some illegal immigrants? And the bloke goes around and turns around and goes, well, I'm going to tell a Coast Guard and then inform the police, which is what everyone should do, right? It's far right. You know, these people are out of control. They're dangerous. They're basically mercenaries. It's just so funny. The thing is that what it is, it creates psychological warfare against the individual, and I've had it used against me so many times that I know what it is now. And it's just, you just cut it off and move on, because it's just nonsense. They'll try and engage you in something or get it slanted. I mean, the website that this fella set up that was slandering me, I found out that it was set up by the two people I'd gone for a drink with. And when I mentioned it to them, they went scarp. I never heard from them again. But they worked for these VoIP companies, Voice over Internet Protocol and all that. You know, it's fascinating stuff, the way it works. But in actual fact, it's really simple. I don't think there's anything complicated about it, you know.
I agree with you. It's really about these loads of fear and loads of imaginary enemies. That's very, very true. But what gets me is that it's like that Occupy. Now, there was more Secret Service people in the Occupy movement, I think, than the actual Occupy movement.
Yeah, we made a film about it. We made a film called Puppet Masters of Occupy, and I saw the Delphi. Yeah, I saw the Delphi technique being used there, Chris. And a woman turned up called Saskia Kent, who's pretty much disappeared off the internet now, but she was all over the internet, and she came in, bolshy change agent. I mean, it's just unbelievable. She walked in, she turned it into Delphi technique, and then she was getting them to all say things like, "What do we want? A sustainable future. Where do we want it? Now." And it was like, "Whose streets? Our streets," and all this stuff. I mean, it's just meaningless garbage, right? So we made the film Puppet Masters of Occupy. And she reduced their Occupy St. Paul's to 12 Marxists and a dog. And that's where we found out about the dragons. The people who come into your face going, no threat, and all this stuff, right? And it's very Clockwork Orange. It's very, you know, but the point is that there's nothing complicated about any of it. It's basically just audacity. It's the audacity to attack somebody verbally or with underhand tactics. And that's all they've got. I mean, I don't know whether you remember that Glenn Greenwald site, which it put out this so-called GCHQ slideshow, and it was about creating cyber magicians and fooling people, and it was called Joint Threat Risk Intelligence Group, right? And it's basically part of the psychological operations thing. And when you actually see what it is and how they do it, it's blatantly obvious. But they're using very similar tactics to what change agents use. So the tactics don't change. They use ad hominems, logical fallacies, and basically always false arguments. And what they do is they use the Saul Alinsky trick, which is Saul Alinsky was this radical housing campaigner in the 60s. And he's got this book, Rules for Radicals. And David Cameron said that they were going to use these Saul Alinsky rules. Now, the Saul Alinsky rules, one of the most important things is that once they start agitating you, they don't stop. So it creates a stress within the person, and they become unpredictable. And that's what a lot of these things are about with psychological operations. If you want to get somebody, my view is this: it works at different levels. So you've got these. The terrorist who drives his car into Westminster Bridge, I think those people have been agitated to such a degree that they've lost their minds. And then what they have to do is maybe give them drugs or whatever and just let them go. Because if you wind someone up enough, they'll do anything. If you wind someone up enough, they will do anything. So it's mind control stuff. It's not some big secret thing. I think it's actually very simple, most of what they do. Personally, that's my view, because it was very sinister what happened to us years ago. I mean, this fella turned up and started writing all this stuff about me and a few others, and basically we did a show about it, myself and David Shaler, because they were attacking him, and he said, well, the thing is, we did a show about it. It's about financing of the country. So they don't want dissent. You know, if me and you started a political party and we got really popular and we started really gaining ground, then we would be dealt with very, very severely. So you can't do it in that way. You have to do it on another way, you see. And I studied this because I think the psychological aspect is the most important thing. I don't think it's the implementation of it. I think it's the psychology that's important. It's the fear. It's not the execution of what is done. I've always thought that, because if you with a psychological warfare, it's about a fear of something that might happen to the person, and it's about an implied threat which grows in their minds, right? And they become obsessed with it. That's psychological warfare. But if someone just attacks you in the street, you're going to react instinctively and do something. That's no good, because that means you're spontaneous. You have to have been ground down and be paranoid and had all this. I mean, I got to a point with it where it did have an effect, and I was thinking, wow, this is powerful stuff. But the thing is, I'm used to the tactics now, and that's why I find the process that is being used quite interesting, and you can spot it a mile off. There is nothing complicated going on. However, I've been rabbiting on that bit there, Chris, but yeah, interesting.
The thing about trolls, I won't give too much away, but again, what I said earlier, I'm looking at them like lab rats, because I find them quite interesting, and I'm categorising, because there's the obvious nutcase. There always was the nutcase in the bed set. I mean, I had a phone troll the other week. I forgot to unplug my phone, and I was talking live on air with Caroline, and first of all, I had a client phone up. That was a genuine call. Then I had another client phone up. That was a genuine call. Then all of a sudden, the phone went mad. It kept phoning. And stupid me, I was busy on looking at the program and things like that. I didn't think of unplugging the phone, and I should have done. And then when I came off air, I had an obscene phone call. Now, I think I know who that person is. And I get phone trolls. How they got my number, I don't know. But I've had trolls in the past. And I think there's the loony, but then there's 2 to 3 types of government ones. And I think you can tell what government they're from, whether it's the British government or a country that we're not allowed to criticise, because they're heavily into this country. And you get this is person talking rubbish. Shall we say, they're trying to demoralise the person all the time. And then you get the other type that pushes the narrative, which says, like for instance, you say, I don't know, I don't like the Isle of Wight much. Oh, he's a racist. He hates people from all over the United Kingdom, all over the world, and they push the narrative further and further and further and further and further. And then you just get the type just to wind you up, to get things wrong. So you get angry and you say more than you should say, and it's quite clever. But I'm going to
that one to get statement. That's an interesting point, actually, Chris, because years ago I did a talk in Hackney. This fella, he was meant to be doing some kind of. It was basically a bit of a charlatan. Actually, he was charging people money for his legal services when he wasn't legally qualified, and he and a lot of people had turned up, and he didn't turn up for the talk. So they said, "Hey, Mark, can you do it?" And I said, "All right." So I did a talk, and this woman introduced herself to me. I won't give her name because she's probably one of these still doing the activist circuit, but she was using this very implausible name which didn't look like her. You know, it was like sort of Xena warrior princess, but it looked like Doc Cotton. You know what I mean? Yeah, and she started phoning me up, and she told me that she had this kind of case that she was dealing with, helping some old people, but down in Devon or something, they were getting kicked out of sheltered accommodation, to get me to think, oh, she's a good person. And she knew a few people I knew, actually. And she said her son was in prison, and she gave me all these stories. And then she started phoning me up and saying, oh, would you do this? Would you? In other words, she was trying to get me to say that I would break the law, basically. And I said, why are you asking me that? No, of course I wouldn't, you know. And that was what you're saying. Yeah, it's a kind of similar thing to what you're saying. And but she wasn't winding me up. She was trying to coax me into doing something. And that's what a lot of them do, you see, because it's they want to get people arrested. They want to get the ringleaders arrested, right? So the way they do it is they'll say it's hate speak or whatever. And I had this about a year ago. Someone took on my friend's charity, these 2 subversives, and they went into Wood Green police station and they made a complaint about me, that I'd said things about them. And I promptly got on and I said to the copper, I said, do you realise that these people broke into a building, they stole everything, they've libelled the trustees of this charity, they've, with their agents, made death threats to the lady who runs the charity. The lady who runs the charity had to leave the area. Those are the 2 people in front of you. What are you going to do about it? So they've gone in to complain about me, going to this diatribe against them. And he goes, well, you'd have to make a separate complaint about that. He said, look, I'm not going to do anything about this today anyway. He said, but it's better you keep away from each other. I said, I haven't had any contact with them whatsoever. They have been basically harassing me. Okay, so that's the thing. It's kind of interesting the way it works, but it doesn't work in a very intelligent way. It really doesn't. Once you see the template, because
that's right. Because a lot of these, there are some trolls that I've had them that befriend you. I don't know whether you call them trolls or not, and they're all over you like a rash. And then they try and get you into trouble. They send you loads and loads and loads of garbage through your email, which you just keep binning and binning and binning. And then they suggest, why don't you interview this person? Why don't you interview that person? People that, if you was to interview them, would be extremely dangerous to get on air. And they just try and get you into trouble. And they're very clever at it. And they've obviously been schooled at it.
But if they're not clever at it, because it didn't work, did it?
Well, I didn't. I suppose you're right there.
So it's not clever, is it?
But I got a feeling these people are either well, I think they've been naughty, and the government said, look, we can lock you up, or if you work for us, we can give you a very nice pension, but you've got to do this and you've got to do that. And I think that's probably the situation, because I think the ones that work for GCHQ are generally university ones like Brian Cox, thick as two short planks. So he's got like, yeah, I do that. I'm very educated, that type. But,
He's not as interesting as that, Chris.
I like that one, Bob.
Master, what do you want me to do? Talk about CO2 like you normally do. Get on with it,
Well, shall we wind this up for tonight? Because
yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Mark. And to the small, I'll be straight with you. Before we came on there, we thought, where's this going to go to? Because we hadn't.
Well, it was, Chris. Yeah, I got in. I was very, very tired, and I had a bit of a rest. And funnily enough, when I got on, I felt fine. So it was that I thought, we're not going to just wing it, are we? And newsflash, news just in, we did, and it was all right. Because I thought we were going to that was a very good topic to get into. Very good. That was a really good one to do, because I think you suggested it earlier. Yeah.
Yeah, because I thought we were going to wing it and I thought the program would be over in about half an hour, because I was getting my doubts. But yeah, it's turned out really good. And I've actually found that when you think the programs are going to be bad, it turns out good. So
it was like last night with Edmund Marriage. By the way, my YouTube is Windows on the World YouTube, and it's linked to Windows on the World. That's right. Yeah, it's on YouTube. Yeah. And if you go to windowsontheworld.net, you'll find everything on there. Everything's in the archive pretty much, apart from the last few shows, with the last few live streams. We did like the one with Edmund Marriage last night. We were already set up, and I spoke to Edmund in the afternoon. I said, "Don't touch anything. We've got it working now, because it took us ages to get this working." And it was like we were surveilling each other. He was sat on the sofa asleep. You know what I mean? I thought, he's all right. He's like. And then we got on, and I found out I was streaming to Facebook and not YouTube. So we had to start it all over again. I had to send him a link. He didn't get the link. We started about past. So we're all ready. That was a classic case, But that was mainly his information last night. And these raps I really enjoyed. So thanks, Chris. That's great.
Well, I think if you tune in on Sunday at 9 o'clock, not here, because I won't be here. I'll be this miserable person, I'm swearing there, in the chat room who's coming out with all these comments, and I'm not a troll. But so tune in to Mark Windows, 9 o'clock, windowsontheworld.net, but not. And
every Wednesday at 8 p.m.
Oh, every Wednesday at 8 p.m. And
on YouTube every Wednesday 8 p.m. Yeah.
Yeah, and we'll wing it on next Thursday. If that's all right with you, Mark, at 7. And I think we'll have a show worked out before then, won't we?
Well, there's so much to talk about, you see, because the thing is that I have access to such a lot of information. People send me stuff all the time. There's never a shortage of material. It's just trying to get that focused and into a framework that's going to be sort of entertaining as well, That's the main thing, to keep the information flowing and I think humour is pretty good as well.
Well, the thing is, why not? We've got a great crowd in the chat room. I mean, they really are smashing. Really good people. Why not throw this out? Not throw this out, but throw it to them and put some comments down on what subjects you'd like us to bring up. And
yes,
do that. And then next week we won't wing it. Don't tell anybody who's winging it this week. And I think that that we'll be talking about what our supporters really want us. I hope we are talking about what our supporters want to hear. But why not? We'll throw this out. Put it down in the comments. What you'd like us to talk about, and we'll go into that. How about that? Okay, fellas, is that all right with you, Mark?
Sounds great to me. Yeah, it's a good idea.
Anyway, how do you? So, if you'd like to say the last word in this.
Well, let's make it the Real People's Assembly, shall we? We'll take we'll call it the Real People's Assembly, and we'll have the real people talking. Yeah, that'd be good, wouldn't it?
And we won't have any of these, will we?
No, no.
Or these.
How dare you?
A bit like Lenin, didn't he?
You stole my future. How dare you?
Thanks, Mark. Thank you, everybody in the chat. I'm sorry if I haven't been able to put all your comments on the screen. I do apologise because it's a bit difficult. I've got to do two things at once.
Yeah, let's talk about homelessness. Yeah, that's a good idea.
That's a good one. Yes, Mandela effect. Yeah, that's really quite good. Thank you very much, everybody. Thanks, Mark, and we'll see you back soon. Thank you.
See you
Bye.
soon.